The harsh crack of a rifle shot shattered the morning stillness as Colton Vance dropped a rabbit at 50 paces, the echo fading across the golden Wyoming prairie that stretched like an ocean around the small homestead. It wasn't much. One rabbit wouldn't feed 5 hungry mouths, but it was something. And something was better than the nothing they'd had for the past 2 days. The summer of 1876 had been unforgiving, and autumn promised little reprieve for the struggling families of Willow Creek. Colton slung his rifle over his shoulder and trudged through the tall grass, his boots heavy with mud from yesterday's brief but violent storm. The rabbit was small, barely enough for a stew, but those children needed something in their bellies. He'd promised their mother he'd help, and a man's word was about the only thing worth anything out here in the frontier. The homestead came into view, a modest cabin with a leaning chimney, a small corral containing 2 horses, and a vegetable patch that had seen better days. Smoke curled from the chimney, telling him that Nora Pierce was awake, probably trying to make breakfast from whatever scraps remained in her pantry. 6 months a widow, with 3 children under 10, and somehow she managed to keep going when most would have given up. As Colton approached, the door flew open and 3 small bodies tumbled out, their faces lighting up at the sight of him. "Mr. Vance, did you get something?" 8-year-old Thomas asked, his eyes wide with hope as they fixed on the rabbit. "Sure did, little man," Colton replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "Not much, but your ma can work miracles with less." 5-year-old Emma and 7-year-old James crowded around him, their thin faces a mixture of excitement and lingering sleep. Colton felt his chest tighten. These children deserved better than this hardscrabble existence, better than losing their father to a mining accident that had crushed the life out of Edward Pierce and the hope from his family. Nora appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Even exhausted and grieving, she was lovely auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, green eyes that had once sparkled with life now dimmed but still determined. At 28, she was too young to be facing such hardship alone. "You're up early," she said, her eyes falling to the rabbit. Relief washed over her features, quickly masked with casual gratitude. "Thank you, Colton. That'll help." He handed her the rabbit. "I'll keep looking. Saw some deer tracks about 2 miles east." Nora nodded and turned to go back inside, but little Emma tugged at her skirt. "Mama, I'm hungry," she whispered, though not quietly enough that Colton couldn't hear. James and Thomas exchanged glances but said nothing. They'd learned to quiet their complaints, but their hollow cheeks spoke volumes. Colton cleared his throat. "They're hungry again," he said gently. Nora's shoulders stiffened for just a moment before she turned around. Instead of the despair he half expected, her eyes flashed with determination. "Then I'll cook till they grow," she answered, her voice steady and sure. "Come inside, Mr. Vance. I can at least offer you coffee for your troubles." Colton hesitated, then nodded. He followed her into the small cabin, ducking his head beneath the low doorframe. The interior was sparse but meticulously clean. A few pieces of sturdy furniture, hand-sewn curtains, and a worn Bible on the table were the only visible possessions. Yet somehow, Nora had created a home here. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to the table as she began preparing the rabbit. "Coffee's hot." The children settled around the table, watching their mother work with quiet reverence. Colton poured himself a cup of coffee and sat, uncomfortable with being waited on but knowing better than to refuse her hospitality. Pride was often all that people had out here. "How are the horses?" Colton asked, trying to make conversation. "Belle's got a limp again," Thomas answered. "I've been rubbing her leg with that liniment Mr. Jensen gave us, but it isn't helping much." Colton nodded. "I'll take a look before I head out." "You've done enough," Nora said without turning from her work. "We can't keep accepting your charity." "It's not charity among neighbors, Mrs. Pierce," Colton replied, the formality feeling strange in his mouth after months of helping her family. "Besides, what would your husband say if I let his family struggle when I could help?" A silence fell over the room at the mention of Edward. Nora's hands paused briefly in their work before resuming with renewed vigor. "Edward would say you're a good man," she finally answered, her voice soft. "And that I'm too stubborn for my own good." A small smile tugged at Colton's lips. He wouldn't be wrong about either. The rabbit went into a pot with the last of the potatoes, some wild onions, and herbs from Nora's small garden. It wasn't much, but as she worked, Colton could see the children watching with anticipation. Their hunger made the meager meal seem like a feast. "I heard they're hiring at the new railroad station in Laramie," Colton said casually. "Thought I might ride out there tomorrow, see what's what." Nora glanced at him. "You're leaving Willow Creek," was that concern in her voice. Colton couldn't tell, not permanently, but winter's coming and extra money wouldn't hurt. "No," she agreed, turning back to her cooking. "It wouldn't." Colton finished his coffee and stood. "I should check on Belle before I go hunting again." Nora nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Thank you." Outside, Colton found Belle in the small corral, her right front leg held slightly off the ground. The mare was old but strong, a gift from Edward's brother when they'd first settled here 4 years ago. Without her, Nora couldn't plow the small field or get into town for supplies. Colton ran his hands down the horse's leg, feeling the heat of inflammation. "Easy, girl," he murmured as Belle shifted uncomfortably. Thomas appeared at his side, watching intently. "Is she gonna be okay? We need her." "She will be," Colton assured him, though he wasn't certain. "But she needs rest, no riding for a few days." The boy's face fell. "But Mama needs to go to town for flour. She said we're almost out." Colton straightened up. "I'll take her or bring the supplies myself." "You do too much for us already," came Nora's voice from behind them. She had followed them out, wiping her hands on her apron. "I can't repay you." Colton turned to face her. "I'm not looking for payment, Mrs. Pierce." "Nora," she corrected him. "After all this time, I think you can call me Nora." Something warm unfurled in Colton's chest. "Nora," he agreed, her name feeling right on his tongue. Their eyes met for a moment too long, and Colton saw something flicker in her gaze: gratitude, confusion, and perhaps something more complicated. But then she looked away, the moment broken. "I have a list," she said briskly. "If you're truly headed to town—" "And money not much, but keep your money," Colton interrupted. "I got paid for that fence work at the Hendersons last week. I can front you until things improve." Nora's pride visibly warred with practicality. "I don't take handouts. It's not a handout. It's a loan between friends." Colton held her gaze steadily. "Or aren't we friends, Nora?" The challenge hung between them. Finally, Nora's shoulders relaxed slightly. "We are," she admitted. "Though friendship doesn't usually involve so much one-sided giving." Colton smiled. "You give plenty." "Those biscuits you sent over last month saved me from my own terrible cooking." A small laugh escaped her, a sound so rare it startled them both. "Those biscuits were hard as rocks." "Still better than mine," Colton insisted, pleased to see the momentary lightness in her expression. Thomas had been watching this exchange with interest. "Mr. Vance, if you're going hunting again, can I come? Pa was teaching me before." He trailed off, his young face suddenly solemn, Nora's expression clouded. "Thomas, Mr. Vance is busy." "He doesn't need—" "I'd be glad for the company," Colton interrupted. "If it's all right with your ma." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "Be back before dark, and mind what Mr. Vance tells you." Thomas's face lit up. "Yes, madam." As they prepared to leave, Colton couldn't help noticing how Nora's hands trembled slightly as she handed Thomas a canteen. The burden she carried was visible in every line of her body, in the shadows beneath her eyes. "We'll be careful," Colton promised her quietly, "and we'll bring back dinner." Nora met his eyes again, and this time he clearly saw gratitude there, along with exhaustion. "Thank you, Colton, not just for this, but for everything." Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the months he'd spent helping her family fixing the leaky roof, mending fences, hunting game when their stores ran low. He wasn't sure why he'd appointed himself their protector. Perhaps it was respect for Edward, who'd been a good man. Perhaps it was the children, who reminded him of the family he'd never had. Or perhaps it was Nora herself, with her quiet strength and stubborn pride. "That's what neighbors do," he said simply. As they set off across the prairie, Thomas chattering excitedly beside him, Colton glanced back at the homestead. Nora stood watching them, a solitary figure framed by the weathered cabin and the vast Wyoming sky. Something tugged at his heart, a feeling he'd been trying to ignore for months, a feeling that had no place in their complicated situation. But it was there all the same, growing stronger with each passing day. The hunting trip with Thomas proved more successful than Colton had dared hope. They returned with 2 rabbits and a fat pheasant, enough meat to feed the family for several days. The boy had shown a natural talent for tracking, pointing out signs that even Colton had missed. "Pa would be proud," Thomas said quietly as they walked back to the homestead, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "He always said I had sharp eyes." Colton nodded. "He was right. You'll be a fine hunter someday." "Ma says we might have to move to town," Thomas continued, kicking at a rock. "Says the farm's too much without Pa." The news shouldn't have surprised Colton, but it hit him with unexpected force. "What do you think about that?" Thomas shrugged, his small shoulders bearing a weight no child should carry. "I dunno. Ma works too hard here, but this is our home." Colton didn't know what to say to that. The boy was right on both counts. When they reached the homestead, they found Nora hanging laundry on the line, Emma helping by handing her clothespins. James was nowhere to be seen. "Where's your brother?" Colton asked Thomas. "Probably in the barn," the boy replied. "He goes there when he's sad, says it smells like Pa." Colton's heart twisted. "Why don't you show your ma what we caught? I'll check on James." Thomas nodded and ran toward his mother, proudly displaying their catch. Colton headed for the small barn, pushing open the weathered door. The interior was dim and dusty, smelling of hay and horses. He found James sitting in an empty stall, a small wooden horse clutched in his hands. "That's fine craftsmanship," Colton said softly. Leaning against the stall door, James looked up, quickly wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "Pa made it for my birthday." Colton nodded and entered the stall, sitting down beside the boy. "Your pa was good with his hands. I remember when he built that addition to the schoolhouse. Nobody could hammer a nail straighter." James smiled faintly. "He was teaching me, said I'd be better than him someday." "I believe that," Colton said. "If you want, I could show you a few things he taught me, not that I'm as good as he was, mind you." The boy looked up at him, hope flickering in his eyes. "Really, really," Colton affirmed. "Your pa would want you to keep learning." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Then James asked, "Mr. Vance, are you sweet on my ma?" Colton nearly choked on his own breath. "What makes you ask that?" James shrugged. "Tommy says you look at her like Pa used to, and you're always helping us." Colton chose his words carefully. "I respect your ma very much. She's a strong woman, and I promised your pa I'd look out for you all if anything happened to him." It wasn't a direct answer, but it seemed to satisfy James. "Ma smiles more when you're around," he said simply, then stood up. "We should go in. Ma will need help with dinner." Colton followed the boy out of the barn, his thoughts in turmoil. Had he been that transparent? And more troubling, was Nora aware of his feelings? Inside the cabin, Nora had already begun preparing the game they'd brought. The stew from earlier simmered on the stove, filling the small space with a savory aroma that made Colton's stomach growl. "Successful hunt," Nora commented, glancing up as they entered. "Thomas tells me he spotted the pheasant." "He did," Colton confirmed. "You've got a natural tracker there." Pride flashed across Nora's face as she looked at her eldest son. "His father's son, through and through." Colton nodded, understanding the bittersweet nature of the observation. "I should head back to my place. Got chores waiting. Won't you stay for dinner?" Emma asked, looking up from where she was setting the table. "We have enough now." Colton hesitated, looking to Nora for guidance. She paused in her work, then nodded. "We do have enough, and you earned your share." It was practical gratitude, not an invitation born of anything deeper, but Colton accepted nonetheless. "Thank you. I'd be glad to stay." Dinner was a lively affair, with Thomas recounting their hunting adventure in elaborate detail, embellishing in the way of young boys. James gradually emerged from his melancholy, joining in the conversation. Emma insisted on sitting beside Colton, occasionally leaning against his arm with the easy affection of childhood. Throughout the meal, Colton found his eyes drawn to Nora. She ate little, ensuring her children had their fill first. When she thought no one was looking, exhaustion claimed her features, but she quickly masked it when one of the children spoke to her. As the meal concluded, Colton helped clear the table despite Nora's protests. The children were sent to wash up and prepare for bed, leaving the adults alone in the small kitchen. "They seem happier with full bellies," Colton observed as he handed her a plate to dry. Nora nodded. "Food has a way of making everything seem better, at least for a while." She hesitated, then added, "I'm worried about winter, Colton. We're not prepared." It was the first time she'd openly admitted her fears to him. "What do you need?" she sighed, setting down the plate she was drying. "Everything. Flour, sugar, coffee. The roof still leaks in the back room. We need firewood, more than I can chop myself. Belle needs to see a veterinarian. The list goes on." Colton considered this. "I'm still planning to head to Laramie tomorrow. The railroad pays well. I could send money back." "I can't ask that of you," Nora said firmly. "You're not asking. I'm offering." Colton turned to face her fully. "Nora, let me help. Not just with hunting or fixing things, but really help." Her green eyes studied his face. "Why? And don't say it's what neighbors do. The Andersons are neighbors, and they haven't set foot on this property since the funeral." Colton took a deep breath. "Because I care about what happens to you and those children. Because Edward was my friend and he'd do the same for me. Because," he stopped, unsure how to continue without revealing too much. "Because," Nora prompted softly. The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken words. Finally, Colton said, "Because you're not alone in this. Not while I'm around." Something in Nora's expression shifted, a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. "I don't know how to accept help. Edward and I, we always managed on our own." "And now?" Colton asked gently. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Now I'm terrified all the time," she whispered. "Terrified of failing them, of losing this place, of not being enough." Without thinking, Colton reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were rough from work but warm in his grasp. "You are enough, Nora, more than enough. But even the strongest people need help sometimes." She didn't pull away from his touch. Instead, she looked down at their joined hands, then back to his face. Something unreadable passed through her eyes. "Mama," Emma's voice broke the moment. "Will you read us a story?" Nora quickly withdrew her hand, composing herself. "Of course, sweetheart. Go choose one." Emma scampered away and Nora turned back to Colton. "Thank you for dinner and for taking Thomas today. It meant a lot to him." Colton nodded, the moment between them gone but not forgotten. "I'll head out at first light tomorrow, should be back within a few days." "Be careful," Nora said softly. "The children would miss you if anything happened." "Just the children?" Colton wondered but didn't ask. "I always am." As he rode home that night, the stars brilliant in the clear Wyoming sky, Colton couldn't stop thinking about the feel of Nora's hand in his, the vulnerability in her eyes. And for the first time, he allowed himself to hope that perhaps, someday, she might see him as more than her late husband's friend. True to his word, Colton left for Laramie at dawn the next day. The journey took most of the day, his horse, Rusty, maintaining a steady pace across the open country. Laramie was growing rapidly thanks to the railroad, the streets busier than Willow Creek's would ever be. He found work easily enough. The railroad was indeed hiring, paying $2 a day for strong backs willing to lay track westward. Colton signed on for 2 weeks, knowing the money would help Nora and her children through the coming winter. The work was backbreaking, hauling ties, driving spikes, moving earth. Colton bunked in a crowded tent with a dozen other men, most of them drifters looking for quick money before moving on. He kept to himself, saving every penny except what he needed for meals. At night, exhausted from labor, he found himself thinking of the Pierce homestead, of Thomas's eager smile, James's solemn eyes, Emma's innocent affection, and Nora. Always Nora, with her quiet strength and the brief moments when her guard lowered enough to reveal the woman beneath the widow's grief. On the 4th day, Colton received unexpected news. The foreman approached him during the midday break, wiping sweat from his brow. "Vance," he called. "Got a telegram for you from Willow Creek." Colton's heart lurched. No one would telegraph unless something was wrong. He took the paper with unsteady hands and read. "Belle died, stop children sick, fever stop, doctor says need medicine from Laramie, stop please help stop." Nora. Colton didn't wait for the day's work to end. He collected his pay for the days worked, purchased the medicine from the town doctor, and rode out immediately, pushing Rusty harder than he liked but knowing every hour counted. The journey back seemed interminable. He reached the Pierce homestead just as dawn broke on the 5th day, his body aching from the hard ride, his mind consumed with worry. The cabin was dark as he approached, but smoke curled from the chimney. He dismounted hastily, nearly stumbling in his exhaustion, and knocked firmly on the door. Moments later Nora appeared, her face pale with fatigue, her hair loose around her shoulders. When she saw him, relief washed over her features. "Colton," she breathed. "Thank God. I came as soon as I got your telegram," he said, stepping inside and removing his hat. "How are they?" "Better today," Nora replied, taking the package of medicine he offered. "The fever broke for Thomas last night. James and Emma are still fighting it." Colton followed her to the back room where all 3 children lay in a single bed. Thomas was awake but weak, his face still flushed. James and Emma slept fitfully, their small bodies radiating heat. "I'll get water," Colton said, moving to the kitchen. He returned with a basin and clean cloths, helping Nora administer the medicine and bathe the children's feverish skin. As they worked, Nora explained how it had started, first Belle collapsing in the corral, then Thomas developing a cough that quickly turned to fever. Within a day, all 3 children were ill. "The doctor said it's going around," she said tiredly. "Something in the water, maybe." He did what he could, but said they needed the medicine from Laramie. "I didn't know who else to ask." "You did right," Colton assured her. "I'm glad you sent for me." They worked through the morning, tending to the sick children. By afternoon, the medicine had begun to take effect. The fevers lowered, and all three children managed to take some broth that Nora prepared. Only when they were sleeping peacefully did Nora finally sit down at the kitchen table, her exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "When did you last sleep?" Colton asked gently. She shook her head. "I don't remember. 3 days ago, maybe. Go rest," he urged. "I'll watch them." Nora looked like she wanted to protest, but fatigue won out. "Wake me if they worsen," she said, rising unsteadily. She paused, then added, "I buried Belle behind the barn. Couldn't wait. I'm sorry." Colton nodded, understanding the practicality of frontier life. "You did what you had to do. Rest now." She disappeared into her small room, and Colton settled in a chair by the children's bed, watching their steady breathing. Despite the circumstances, a sense of rightness filled him. This was where he needed to be. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, Emma was tugging at his sleeve. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, her eyes brighter than they had been earlier. "I'm thirsty." Colton helped her drink, relieved to find her fever had dropped significantly. "How do you feel, little lady?" "Better," she said. "Is Mama sleeping?" "Yes, she's very tired from taking care of you all," Emma nodded solemnly. "She cried when Belle died and when we got sick. She thought I was sleeping, but I wasn't." Colton's heart ached at the image. "Your mama's very strong, but everyone gets scared sometimes." "She's not scared when you're here," Emma observed with a child's simple perception. "She smiles more." Before Colton could respond to this revelation, James stirred, and then Thomas, both boys looking improved though still weak. Colton helped them drink water and use the chamber pot, grateful that Nora was getting much-needed rest. As evening approached, he prepared a simple meal from the supplies in Nora's kitchen: cornbread, and more broth for the children, beans and salt pork for himself. The familiar domestic tasks felt natural, as if he belonged in this small cabin with these people who had somehow become so important to him. Nora emerged just as he was setting the table, her hair hastily pinned up, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but clearer than before. "You should have woken me," she said, taking in the scene before her. "You needed rest," Colton replied, "and they're doing better. Fever's down for all three." Relief softened Nora's features. She moved to check on her children, feeling their foreheads and speaking quietly to each one. Satisfied, she returned to the kitchen. "You cooked," she observed. Colton shrugged. "Nothing fancy. Hope I didn't overstep." "No," Nora said, and to his surprise she smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "It's nice to have help." They ate together at the table, the children still too weak to join them. As they finished, Colton reached into his pocket and placed a small pile of bills on the table. "It's not much," he said. 4 days' pay, but it should help with supplies for winter." Nora stared at the money, then at him. "Colton, I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently. "And you will for them." He nodded toward the bedroom where her children rested. Nora's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "How will I ever repay you?" "You don't need to," Colton said. Then, gathering his courage, he added, "Though there is something I'd like to discuss with you, about the future." Nora tensed slightly. "What about it?" Colton took a deep breath. "I know you've been considering moving to town, but I was thinking, what if you stayed here on your land?" "Without Belle, I can't work the fields," Nora said, confusion evident in her voice. "And winter's coming. How would we survive?" "What if you weren't alone?" Colton asked quietly. What if I helped? Not just occasionally, but permanently." Understanding dawned in Nora's eyes. "Colton, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I care about you, Nora. You and those children. Have for some time now." He held her gaze steadily. "I'm not trying to replace Edward. I know that's not possible, but maybe in time you could see your way to considering a new start. With me." Nora sat very still, her eyes wide. "This is unexpected. I know it's sudden," Colton said quickly. And I'm not asking for an answer now, just think about it. For the children's sake, if nothing else. For the children, Nora repeated softly, her eyes searching his face. To start with, Colton admitted. But I hope maybe someday for us too. Silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Finally, Nora reached across the table and took his hand, much as he had taken hers days before. I don't know what to say, she confessed. Edward's only been gone 6 months. I haven't even thought about another man. I understand, Colton said, though his heart sank a little. Like I said, no need for an answer now. I'm not going anywhere. Nora's fingers tightened around his. That's just it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. When I got your telegram saying you were coming back, I felt relief, not just because of the medicine, but because you were coming home. Her eyes met his. It scared me feeling that way. Hope flickered in Colton's chest. And now I'm still scared, Nora admitted. But maybe a little less so. It wasn't a declaration of love, not even close, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that something existed between them, something that might, with time and patience, grow into more. That's enough for me, Colton said softly. For now. Over the next few weeks, as autumn deepened toward winter, a new routine established itself at the Pierce homestead. Colton didn't move in. That would have caused too much talk in town, but he spent most days there, helping with repairs, hunting, and preparing for the coming cold. He purchased a sturdy mare to replace Belle, using the remainder of his railroad earnings. Nora protested, but not as strongly as she once would have. The children thrived under the arrangement, especially the boys, who soaked up Colton's instruction in hunting, tracking, and basic carpentry. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic between Colton and Nora shifted. Her smiles came more readily, lingering longer. She no longer stiffened when their hands accidentally touched. Sometimes, in the evening as they sat by the fire while the children slept, she would speak of Edward not with the raw grief of recent loss, but with the gentler remembrance of a love that had been real and true. And Colton listened, understanding that her memories of Edward weren't obstacles to overcome, but parts of who she was, parts he needed to honor if he ever hoped to win her heart. Winter arrived with a vengeance in early December, a blizzard sweeping down from the mountains with little warning. Colton was at the Pierce homestead when it hit, having spent the day reinforcing the barn. As the wind howled outside, they huddled around the stove, the children wide-eyed at nature's fury. "Will Santa still come?" Emma asked worriedly, Christmas being just 2 weeks away. "Of course he will," Nora assured her. "Santa isn't afraid of a little snow." "A lot of snow," James corrected, peering out the frost-covered window. "It's higher than the fence posts now." Colton exchanged a glance with Nora. They had been planning modest gifts for the children: new mittens, wooden toys he had carved in secret, candies from the general store. But if the storm continued, travel to town would be impossible. "You should stay tonight," Nora said quietly as the children prepared for bed. "It's not safe to ride back in this." Colton nodded, relieved she had suggested it. "I'll sleep by the fire." Later, with the children asleep and the cabin quiet except for the crackling of flames and the moan of wind, they sat side by side on the small sofa Colton had repaired months earlier. "I've been thinking about what you said," Nora began suddenly. "About staying here, about us." Colton's heart quickened, but he kept his voice steady. And Nora stared into the fire, her profile gilded by its light. "I loved Edward. Part of me always will." "I know," Colton said softly. "I wouldn't want it any other way." She turned to look at him then, her eyes searching his face. "But he's gone, and we're here, and those children need a father, and I." She paused, gathering courage. "I need more than memories to keep me warm at night." The simple honesty of her words moved him deeply. "Nora," he began, but she placed a finger against his lips. "Let me finish," she said. "I'm not offering grand passion or the kind of love songs are written about. I don't know if I'm capable of that again. But I care for you, Colton. I respect you." "And if that's enough, it's more than enough," he interrupted, taking her hand in his. "It's everything." In the firelight, Nora's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes to staying here, yes to starting again, yes to us." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Colton leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, full of promise rather than demand. When they parted, Nora's cheeks were flushed, but she didn't look away. "The children will be pleased," she said with a small smile. "Especially Emma. She's been asking when you're going to be her papa." Colton laughed softly. "Smart girl." Like her mother, Nora teased, a lightness in her voice he had rarely heard before. As the blizzard raged outside, they talked long into the night of practical matters like combining their households, of dreams for the farm's future, of hopes for the children. And when the fire burned low and exhaustion finally claimed them, they fell asleep side by side on the narrow sofa, Nora's head resting on Colton's shoulder, his arm protectively around her. Spring came to Wyoming with its usual capriciousness, warm days followed by sudden frosts, gentle rains giving way to fierce winds. But by May of 1877, the Pierce homestead, now the Pierce Vance homestead, was transformed. The marriage had taken place on Christmas Eve, a small ceremony in the cabin with only the children, the preacher, and a few close neighbors as witnesses. By spring, no one in Willow Creek questioned their union. Indeed, most wondered why it hadn't happened sooner. The winter had been hard but manageable, thanks to Colton's preparations and Nora's careful management of resources. Now, with the land greening again, they worked side by side planting a larger garden, Colton's strong hands breaking ground that had lain fallow the previous year. The children flourished under the new arrangement. Thomas, approaching 9, followed Colton everywhere, absorbing knowledge of farming and hunting with an eagerness that made both adults smile. James had emerged from his shell of grief, revealing a quick mind and gentle spirit. And Emma, now 6, had appointed herself Colton's special helper, insisting on being involved in every project. One evening in late May, as twilight painted the prairie in shades of gold and purple, Nora found Colton on the porch, whittling a new toy for Emma's upcoming birthday. "They're asleep," she said, settling beside him on the bench he had built during the winter. Finally, Thomas wanted 3 stories tonight. Colton smiled, setting aside his work to make room for her. That boy's appetite for stories is as big as his appetite for food. Nora leaned against him, her body fitting naturally against his side. Speaking of appetites, they were hungry again tonight, 3 helpings each. "They're growing like weeds," Colton observed, his arm settling around her shoulders. "James is going to be taller than Thomas soon, I think." Nora nodded, a contented silence falling between them. After a moment, she said, "Do you remember what you said that day last summer? When you brought the rabbit?" "I said a lot of things, I imagine. You said they're hungry again." "And I said, then I'll cook till they grow," Colton finished for her, the memory clear in his mind. "I remember." Nora took his hand and placed it on her stomach, which had just begun to curve outward in recent weeks. "Well, I'll be cooking for one more soon." Joy surged through Colton, so intense it momentarily robbed him of words. "Nora," he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her eyes shining in the fading light. "The baby will come around Christmas, Dr. Miller says." Colton pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed. "A family of my own." "You've been a father to those children since the day you stepped up to help us," Nora said softly. "This baby will just make it official." They sat together as darkness fell, talking of the future of the baby, of expanding the house, of the crops that would feed their growing family. And when Nora shivered in the evening chill, Colton led her inside to the warmth of the home they had built together. As they prepared for bed, Nora paused, a question in her eyes. "Any regrets?" she asked. "About taking on a widow with 3 children and a struggling farm," Colton crossed to her, taking her face gently between his hands. "Not a single one," he said firmly. "This life, you, the children, this baby, this land, it's more than I ever dreamed of having. It's everything." In the soft lamplight, Nora's face softened with love, not the desperate, passionate love of youth, but something deeper, richer, built on shared struggle and mutual respect. It had grown slowly, this love between them, nurtured by daily kindnesses and common purpose. "I love you, Colton Vance," she said simply, the words still new enough to make his heart skip. "And I love you, Nora Vance," he replied, sealing the declaration with a kiss. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang through the prairie grass, and stars emerged in the vast sky above their small homestead. Inside, in the shelter they had created together, a family slept in peace, 3 children dreaming of tomorrow's adventures, a woman carrying new life, and a man who had found his purpose in loving them all.